There's a player that I wanted to ask you about who has been linked to Man United for a number of times now. There's been reports in the last few days that he is now wants to leave Tottenham. And that is Harry Kane, who we know has been on Manchester United's shortlist for a while. That was confirmed by Laurie Whitwell yesterday. How likely is it that Man United go in for a player like Harry Kane this summer, both for his needs and theirs, with new owners?
Well, I've said since October that Kane's priority was to try and find a way of staying at Spurs. And that's down to, obviously, a love for the club. And at that point last year is a belief in the project. And on top of that, I think a feeling with Champions League football last season, won by leapfrogging Arsenal towards the end of the season, that things were moving in the right direction. But you can understand why Kane's been waiting, because he has to see the proof in the pudding. And somebody like him is kind of in control to an extent of Tottenham's fate, because although he would also want to understand the incoming likely new manager and whether or not, for example, Daniel Levy is going to entertain any kind of any investment, and also generally where the business is moving, Kane can also just score goals and qualify for Champions League football and help Spurs move in the right direction. And there was always that feeling from Kane, therefore, that things were quite calm. But now, at this point in the season, Spurs have been thrown into turmoil. And Antonio Conte, since the Champions League exit, has kind of been baiting almost the Spurs ownership to try, some would argue, and be sacked. And he's pointed fingers left, right, and centre. He's also made some valid, I think, points, though, but perhaps in the wrong tone or at the wrong time or with the wrong wording. And when you do that, you can undermine the point that you're making. And I think that if you're Kane, you're almost listening to Conte and saying, you know what? He's right in some respects. And it is these aspects of the club that he's frustrated with that I'm also a little bit disillusioned by. On the flip side, of course, Spurs spent a lot of money and brought in a lot of players over the summer. So I think that Antonio Conte had more say and control than any other Spurs manager under Daniel Levy. And a player, for example, like Ivan Perisic is a good example of that. I think the age and the profile of that type of player would not always have been signed and sanctioned by Tottenham and Daniel Levy in seasons gone by. And yet Conte had that control. Levy invested more money over the summer, and still Spurs are in that same position of always taking a step forwards and then potentially two back. So now there is a ability for Harry Kane to scour the market and look at options. And I still wouldn't rule out a Spurs renewal. I still think that there's a very realistic possibility that Harry Kane stays at Spurs, because people close to Kane and Spurs have been very calm about the situation and consistent that in an ideal world, he wants to stay. But if the project isn't going according to plan, there becomes a window of opportunity. And that's where Manchester United come in. And unlike Bayern, who have long been linked with Kane, I'm still told that he wants to stay in the Premier League, which again breeds into that narrative that if he could stay at Spurs, he would. The challenge for Manchester United is that they've got to convince the player and negotiate with Daniel Levy. And Manchester United fans might remember how infuriating it was to negotiate over Dimitar Berbatov. And also when Kane was trying to force his way out of Spurs and move to Manchester City, Levy turned around and said, go away, it's 200 million or nothing. And this is the problem, that if Levy's bullish, then nobody's getting a deal done for Harry Kane. And I've said many times that it's not a 70, 80 million deal. It's going to be 100 million or more, even with the contract winding down. So Manchester United have to find the funds. They have to convince Harry Kane, and they have to negotiate with Daniel Levy, which they really don't enjoy doing. And that's why maybe Victor Osimhen will be a target that is a little bit easier to get done, because he dreams of playing in the Premier League. They'll have to still pay top dollar for that. But also, he's a younger profile. And this is the sort of balance. You're not going to get Osimhen and Kane. So it's one or the other if you're Manchester United. And if it's Kane, you get proven Premier League experience. You pay a high value for a slightly older player. You've got to negotiate with Levy. And there's genuinely no guarantee that that deal gets done. It's too premature to be saying that Manchester United can get that deal done. Do they want to get it done? Absolutely. Is he on their radar? Completely. Are they monitoring that situation and seeing if it's possible? 100%. But is Kane still considering renewing at Spurs? Yes. And was that heading into the season his priority? It was, which means that Manchester United are on the back foot and are going to have to qualify for Champions League and then push very hard on that and maybe hope that Daniel Levy comes down on the price. With Victor Osimhen, it's a slightly different story. Napoli are flying. They're on a procession to Serie A. They're genuine Champions League contenders. They don't want to lose Victor Osimhen, but there's a chance there. And if you get Osimhen, you get a younger player, which might mean that the transfer fee that you pay is more of an investment rather than an expense. So both are there. Manchester United haven't really determined, contrary to some reports, a priority between the two. They're assessing the market as you would expect. And Manchester United's biggest aim is to qualify for Champions League football, to get that budget, regardless of new owners, to ensure that they can have a big summer window. And then we'll see which one they think is feasible. But my sense is that Kane is difficult at the moment, even with Spurs being very chaotic, because there's a lot of hurdles to overcome to get in a position where you can make that deal viable. Whereas Osimhen is still about negotiating with Napoli, who are extremely tough negotiators, but he's been at that club for a little bit longer than his partner in crime, Kvaradona, as he's known, who only joined over the summer. And he's already putting that narrative out there that he dreams of playing in the Premier League. So there's a real window of opportunity there. But both those transfers are going to command 100 million plus, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think Man United fans are sort of there's some United fans that do not want Kane. They think he's too expensive for his age. Of course, he's tainted with the stench of failure at Tottenham, which a lot of people have an issue with, that he has been part of that failure. He has failed to deliver in a lot of big games, especially in cup competitions. I don't necessarily share that sentiment. I feel that Harry Kane would be such an asset to Manchester United, both in terms of leadership, goal scoring, and playmaking ability in this side. But I also understand if Harry Kane is going to cost 100 million, and the rumors are that Napoli will charge around 150 million pounds for Victor Osimhen, who is a hell of a lot younger, that is more of a longer term investment, as well as somebody that's going to hit that ground running now and deliver. There are also other strikers out there as well. A lot of United fans are talking about Ferguson and what he might be able to bring. Although I think that the ownership of Man United is key if the Glazers are still here, the takeover falls through, but we get Champions League money, there will be 2 or 3 big signings in the summer. I'm pretty sure of that. However, new ownership comes in, clears debt, invests money, plus there's Champions League. That's when I think you see a very different summer indeed, in terms of you go and get an Osimhen or a Kane, but maybe someone like a Ferguson comes in as well as another player for the future and a backup option. I think Man United's summer window, and the window for everybody, therefore, because the domino effect always takes place, looks very different if a new billionaire owner comes in who wants to invest the maximum amount of money they can, frees up that debt, allows more. And we've seen how Chelsea have spent their money as well. You can overspend it to a degree in the first year or two, because you can fix it later on down the line with new sponsorship deals and sort yourselves out. So, expect to see huge spending. But Harry Kane, he's still my personal preferred choice. And I do think, again, with new owners, that's a new kind of way of convincing players. There is almost an element of, look, we know in the last decade it hasn't worked, but we're showing you that we can win trophies again with Erik ten Hag, and there's improvement. But the ownership and the people that were running the club who failed for a decade after Fergie, if they're gone, that's no longer a narrative to kind of look at. I'd be using Newcastle as an example. I'd be using City, and I'd be using Chelsea as, look what happened when Roman, Sheikh Mansour, and the Saudis got involved. The turnaround and speed of change at that club. That's what we've got to be using, because Harry Kane, I think, is an easier player to land from a personal point of view, because he hasn't got as many options. Victor Osimhen, and it's probably a good segue into this, really, he's linked heavily with many clubs. PSG want him, Chelsea as well. I've seen, and I know you're very connected to Chelsea. They're looking at him, they're linked to him, and there's a lot of Chelsea fans today that have been messaging us saying, any news on Victor Osimhen joining Chelsea? Is that a viable option for Chelsea this summer, do you feel?
Chelsea will be in the race for Victor Osimhen for sure, and a lot's going to depend upon the Napoli side. And as you say, the price, I'd be surprised if it's as high as 150 million euros. The reason why we're hearing that number, just so people understand, is because Napoli paid a lot of money for Osimhen. I think sometimes with players, people think that when they move to the Premier League, that's their big fee and investment. And it can be, and you can end up making, if you're the selling club, a giant profit. But that's not the case here. Napoli's total package for Osimhen from Lille in 2019 was 80 million euros, of which 70 million euros can be construed as the upfront fee, with about 10 million euros in bonuses. And within that 70 million euros, it was a mixture of cash and player swaps. So the total valuation of the upfront player plus cash was about 70 million euros with bonuses on top. And as a consequence, if you see the form now and the age and the profile and the interest, you can understand why Napoli are basically doubling that outlay and saying that's the ideal price tag. I suspect that it will be lower than 150 million euros. We wait and see by how much. But clubs like Chelsea and Manchester United are not going to get sucked into a bidding war, especially Chelsea. Their strategy is to avoid the bidding war by going early, trying to pre-agree deals. We saw it with their attempt for Josko Gvardiol last summer. We know that Christopher Nkunku is coming in from Leipzig. That one was pre-agreed as well. And from Manchester United's point of view, the most interesting thing about new ownership is we don't know the strategy. So anybody looking at how they might deal with Victor Osimhen is guessing at who could be owning Manchester United. And of course, we cannot entirely rule out the Glazers staying either, and how they will approach that type of recruitment, not just in the what fee would they be prepared to pay, but what wage structure. And that's the other thing about Manchester United heading into the summer with Marcus Rashford's renewal and other players. Are they going to remove the Champions League clause whereby wages go up and down depending on qualification? Are they going to try and lower the average age of the squad, the wage bill? Are they going to make it more incentive driven? Are they going to leave things as is? We don't know. And all of that will inform the recruitment and the lure to the player. Are they going to go down the Chelsea route, even though the rules are going to be changing, and offer longer term contracts? Do they want a high volume of youth? To what extent do they want outgoings? And again, all of that will not only be informed by what they inherit, but also who they bring in on the football side. So people are second guessing on budgets and also on strategy. And that will impact what attracts the player and what doesn't attract a player. With Chelsea, the challenge that they have had is with their existing players buying into, Mason Mount is a good example, the lowering of the wage bill, but the increasing of incentives. So Chelsea want long-term contracts, they want high incentivization, but they also want Champions League decreases, which they never had under Roman Abramovich. And Victor Osimhen has to look at the project at Chelsea and also understand in his own mind whether or not he wants to walk into a club that in all likelihood is not going to have Champions League football. So Chelsea have to convince the player, and every club has to also negotiate with Napoli, who will do everything in their power to sell Victor Osimhen in 2024, not 2023. And the other thing just to add is that Kvaradona and Osimhen will not go in the same window. Napoli simply won't sanction it. So the advantage for Osimhen is that he's been there longer, whereas with Kvaradona, he's only been at the football club since last summer. They're much more likely to offer him a new deal, and he'll agree to that. But with Victor Osimhen, there's a window of opportunity. The other clubs, I think, are genuinely in the race, including PSG, but Osimhen wants the Premier League. So Chelsea, Manchester United have an advantage. Chelsea want a traditional number 9, and we know that Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, for example, is outgoing. Amanda Broja is young and injured at the moment. They're looking for that focal point. Osimhen ticks a lot of boxes. So I expect Chelsea to be there. They're going to be looking at Dusan Vlahovic as well, and Ivan Toney, depending on the repercussions of the betting allegations, could come into the mix as well. And these are things that are being discussed internally and are likely to advance in the next month or two. But Osimhen is quite high up on Chelsea's list. Dusan Vlahovic is seen as maybe a more value option at this point and a player that Graham Potter really likes. So I think he's one to keep an eye on. Even Manchester United have looked at Vlahovic. They've added him to the list as well. But what gives Manchester United confidence that if they choose to proceed with Osimhen over Kane, that they can win that race, is that Victor Osimhen was sold on Manchester United as a club when he considered joining a few years back before he joined Napoli. And the only thing that stopped him from moving was that he was young and didn't think that he'd get any game time. There was no issue with the club and the vision. He loved the idea of being a Manchester United player. He just felt like for his career development, it was the wrong timing. And the reason for that is because Manchester United had a lot of players in his position, including Ighalo, who he knows very well. I think Zaha was there at the time too. So he thought that with established players and peripheral players, he wasn't going to get any minutes to develop. And that's why ultimately he didn't make the move. So the irony in all of this is back then, Ighalo, who he knows really well, was one player in the squad that he thought, if he's above me, then I'm never going to get any game time and I could get stifled at this football club. Now he's spoken to Ighalo again about the club and he's even more sold that this could be the right time to move. So that doesn't mean that he's decided Manchester United, but it means if Manchester United choose to move and agree a figure with Napoli, then I sense Osimhen would be very excited by the prospect to join Manchester United, probably more so than Chelsea at this point. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out why, because Manchester United are screaming for somebody in that role. And Weghorst is not likely to stay. And even if he did and new terms were agreed, Osimhen is ahead of Weghorst clearly in that pecking order. Champions League football, a Buzz trophy already won this season, heading into next season, new ownership group very likely coming in. It's all heading in the right direction. Whereas with Chelsea, it's about what's going on with the manager, what's going on with the formation, what's going on with the front line. And even though if Aubameyang goes, you still got Broja there, you still got Havertz there, you've got Nkunku coming in, João Felix may well sign on a permanent deal, and Mason Mount could still potentially stay. Christian Pulisic, Hakim Ziyech, they're all there. They're all interchangeable. Not everyone is Osimhen in his position, but Chelsea have to say to a player like Osimhen to get him, this is the vision. This is who's going. This is who's staying. This is where you'll play. This is the formation we're sticking to. This is the manager we're sticking to. Manchester United are now a bit further along than Chelsea in their vision. And if they get Champions League football and new owners on top of that, then I think that if Manchester United and Chelsea are both head-to-head for Osimhen, same price, same deal, and it all comes down to player choice, then at this point, I think Osimhen is picking Manchester United all day long.